When we talk to organizations that have successfully gone digital, the number one factor they point to is pathologist adoption and satisfaction with the platform. And once you orient around that, the sequencing question of should we be really focusing on a scanner first or software first and let that drive the decision kind of answers itself because pathologists don't interact with the scanner. They interact with the software, the viewer, the work list, the AI tools, the collaboration experience. That's their daily environment. So if adoption is really your primary success metric, the platform really has to be the starting point.
Welcome to the People of Pathology podcast. I'm Dennis Strain. On this podcast, we explore pathology one story at a time and connect with the people behind the diagnosis. For many organizations, figuring out how to evaluate digital pathology platforms can feel overwhelming. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a guide to show you how to do it? Well, lucky for you, because there is. My friends at Proscia recently released their Digital Pathology Buyer's Guide. Today, my guest is Ashley Faber, Senior Director of Product Marketing. Ashley and I discussed the guide and some of the important questions you need to ask when evaluating a digital pathology platform. All right, let's get into this conversation with Ashley Faber. So I am here with Ashley Faber from Proscia. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dennis.
Proscia recently came out with a digital pathology buyer's guide, and we're going to spend this episode talking about that because it's very interesting and I think probably a very useful resource and a very good time for it to come out. I'd like to know what prompted Proscia to create this buyer's guide.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me on. And I'd love to, maybe I'll back up a bit
Okay.
and just introduce myself and the company a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
that sounds good.
I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Proscia, and Proscia builds Concentric, which is an intelligent pathology platform. And our platform serves both the clinical and the life sciences settings. On the clinical side, anatomic pathology labs use the platform for primary diagnosis. It's FDA 510K cleared and CE IVDR certified. And on the life sciences side, pharma and CRO organizations use Concentric to help get drugs to market faster and match patients to therapies. That includes translational research, clinical trials, and companion diagnostic development. So when you take a step back, you see that Concentric addresses the precision medicine value chain from drug discovery to diagnostics. And now going back to your question, what prompted us to create a buyer's guide? Digital pathology on the clinical side is still a relatively young market in the US, especially. A lot of organizations are going through this procurement process for the first time. They don't have a playbook from a prior purchase to build on. They don't have a lot of colleagues to turn to and say, how did you do this at your organization? So there's a real hunger to learn, like what are other organizations asking for? What questions should we be asking that we haven't thought of? What separates a good evaluation from an insufficient one? And Proscia is in a unique position to have a vantage point on that because we've had the privilege of receiving hundreds of RFPs. That's like a request for proposal, the formal questionnaire that organizations issue to prospective vendors when they're buying a product. And Proscia was actually recently named the most frequently considered digital pathology platform in the US by Class Research in their recent report just this year. So between that and our European market, we've gotten to see quite a few of these requests for proposals over the years. And we noticed that many organizations were starting with evaluation frameworks that were very feature focused. They had very binary yes or no questions that hide a lot of the nuance behind these capabilities and how they actually work in a real clinical workflow. Because, for example, if you say, do you do LAS integration? Every vendor can say yes to that, but very few have done it bidirectionally at scale in production and working environments. So that's just one thing that we noticed. And we've also completed over 100 successful digital pathology deployments of real organizations going live with digital pathology. So we've seen the before and after play out over and over again. And that experience has given us a pretty deep understanding about what organizations should really be asking upfront to make sure their expectations are aligned with the vendor they choose. So we would receive these RFPs and just look at each other like, they're not totally asking the right questions. Like, the questions are fine, they're just not as good as they could be, and it's no fault of their own, just not fully understanding the full scope of what they could and often should be considering. So, we distilled everything we learned into this comprehensive evaluation framework, and we made a very intentional decision to not make it about Concentric or Proscia when we were, thinking about how we wanted to structure this. Like, we really just wanted to have it stand on its own as practical advice for anyone navigating this decision. And we actually had one buyer capture it perfectly. They just told our sales team, and I might just read this quote I have here
Okay.
that the team passed on to me, but they just said, "I was very surprised that your buyer's guide was as agnostic as it was. I expected it to be a marketing trap, more of a promo for your own product. I was pleasantly surprised that it's really just, here's the best advice we can give you." And I was really happy to hear that because that's truly what we set out to do. Like, here's the best advice we can give anyone embarking on this digital journey, because ultimately we want everyone to have a great experience with digital pathology, period. That's really what drives the industry forward. So even if an organization isn't the right match for Concentric, the important thing is that more labs go digital, they're not intimidated by the process, and that once they're live, they have a great experience because they selected the right partner for them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I've read the guide too, and I've had that same, I guess, reaction. Like it's not about concentric or Proscia. Like you said,
Mhm.
it's asking the right questions. And I want to go through some of the questions that it says to ask. Are you buying an image management system, or are you buying a platform to transform your
Mhm.
pathology department? I wonder with that one, have you seen examples of what happens when they don't ask that question?
Yeah, I think it helps to think about digital pathology software as it's really evolved through 3 generations, I would say. So the
Okay.
first generation was viewers, like desktop applications that scanner companies built so you could look at the images their hardware produced. Most organizations have moved past that, so, that's in the past. The second generation is the image management system, or the IMS. This is what a lot of people still think of when they hear digital pathology software. It combines viewing with centralized storage, basic image sharing, some metadata management. It's essentially a digital slide tray. The third generation is the enterprise pathology platform, which is where pathology can actually be practiced in full. It can handle complex workflows, process orchestration. So if you think about what a pathologist day actually looks like, and more fully what, a day in the lab actually looks like, cases need to be routed to the right subspecialist. Second opinion requires pulling a colleague into a slide for a live consult. Workload needs to be distributed across the team, balanced by urgency and capacity. Tumor board prep needs to happen. So all of these things, what can happen when an organization gets this wrong? Sometimes they'll select an IMS that checks every box on a feature list at a competitive price, and they're happy with the decision. But then 6 months later, they want to deploy AI for prostate grading or breast IHC scoring. The platform only supports the vendor's own AI really well, or really doesn't support AI directly into the workflow. They want to share cases across 3 sites, but the IMS wasn't architected for multi-site workflows, and now they're stuck using digital pathology only on one site. They want to explore a pharma partnership, but there's no research module and no de-identification capability, for example. So now they're stuck, and not because the vendor misinterpreted anything, but because the evaluation only asked the surface level questions and maybe a little bit, not looking enough into the future of where the lab might grow and expand. And what we have seen is the cost of that mistake is hard to swallow, because you spent maybe a year training pathologists, integrating with your LIS, building workflows and trust. Probably that's the most important part. And now a year later, telling your team, we need to start over, erodes a lot of confidence in the entire digital pathology initiative. And people start to wonder whether digitization was the right call in the first place. That's like an outcome we never want to see. Going back to our goal just being, we really want everyone to have a great experience with digital pathology. It's really bad for everyone in the field. So
Right.
that's why the guide really lays out a spectrum from basic image management system to full enterprise AI pathology platform across, I think there's about a dozen capability
Mhm.
dimensions, because on a standard feature checklist, a basic IMS and an enterprise platform can look surprisingly similar, but the difference only surfaces when you really ask, okay, well, how deep are your integrations? How scalable? How open is your platform? Now, for a small independent lab that has one site and doesn't plan to expand AI use, an image management system might be perfectly fine. That's a totally legitimate choice and probably the right choice in a lot of cases. The danger is when enterprise organizations make that same choice without realizing the limitations.
Okay, I see. And it seems like throughout reading this guide, you're not just making decisions of what your lab is going to do now. You have to sort of
Mhm.
anticipate what you're going to need in the future, right?
Right, exactly, because it is a big change management and you're not going to want to, in 1 year, flip over again a totally new software process, integrations, all of that.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because lots of times when you hear people talking about our lab's going to go digital, the first thing that they're talking about is the scanners, the hardware. And from
Mhm,
this guide says that might be a bit of a mistake. You should be looking maybe at the software first, right? Can you talk about that?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk to organizations that have successfully gone digital, the number one factor they point to is pathologist adoption and satisfaction with the platform. And once you orient around that, the sequencing question of should we be really focusing on a scanner first or software first and let that drive the decision kind of answers itself, because pathologists don't interact with the scanner. They interact with the software, the viewer, the work list, the AI tools, the collaboration experience. That's their daily environment. So if adoption is really your primary success metric, the platform really has to be the starting point. So to your question, like why do so many organizations still go scanner first? There are a few reasons that I see. One is just how people naturally think about the workflow. Glass slides go on a scanner, the scanner produces an image, the image goes into the software. It's just a linear chain, and there's like an intuitive logic to just starting at the beginning. You need images before you can do anything with them. But the platform is actually the piece that determines what's possible downstream with those images, which AI you can deploy, how cases get routed, how sites collaborate, how your data is governed, and again, most importantly, how your pathologists and your lab professionals are going to use the software day in and day out. Another reason is a bundling play. So sometimes scanner vendors bundle their own software with the hardware, which can feel like a deal, like one purchase order, one vendor relationship, simpler procurement. But it's worth understanding there are some trade offs to that simplicity. You may be committing to image formats, their ecosystem, or some constraints there potentially, just something worth examining. There's also how procurement works in different organizations. So in health systems, for example, sometimes scanners go through capital equipment budgets, and that's a familiar process. It's in the pathology budget already. Software may go through IT, which can be completely different approval chain and timeline. So sometimes it's organizationally easier to buy the scanner first simply because that budget is more ready to go. But if possible, we do recommend specific sequence in the guide. Define your workflow requirements first, select your software platform second, then evaluate which scanners are compatible. That order gives you negotiating leverage on hardware and the freedom to evolve your scanner fleet over time. And for labs that already own scanners, because that's also what we see from maybe from a prior pilot or research grant, the instinct is to find software that works with what they already have, which is completely understandable and often the right starting point. You just have to be aware that, okay, this might be narrowing our choices before the evaluation begins. So it's worth asking whether long term this does really make sense to shape our decision around this or not. And the answer might be yes. But yeah.
Okay, a couple points you made that I want to expand on. You were talking about that to really have adoption of the system, it needs to be easy for the pathologist to use, right? They're essentially the end
Right.
users. And it says in the guide a few times that you should involve your pathologist in these decisions early and often. And
Mhm.
I have to think that sometimes that's not the case, especially since it's directly included in this guide. And maybe that doesn't happen as
You'd be
much.
surprised.
Right. Yeah. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it is surprising sometimes. We've seen the full gamut of how this has gone, but in a lot of organizations, digital pathology starts as a technology initiative. So the technology team might naturally take the lead, and that makes sense. It is a significant IT infrastructure decision. And pathologists typically do get involved. So, not trying to say, most of the time, nobody asks a pathologist for their opinion, because that's not true. But from what we see, it can sometimes be too late in the process or just not deeply hands on enough. I think there's an assumption out there, and this comes from many people early in their digital pathology evaluation and people who maybe are not pathologists using these tools day in and day out. But I think there's an assumption out there that a viewer is a viewer. They're all basically the same. Pathologists haven't gone digital yet. They'll adapt to it. What we choose, they're all the same. So we definitely challenge that assumption. Some platforms are more intuitive than others. Some platforms put more care into the transition to digital than others. And that's why we recommend something very specific in the guide. Don't just watch demos, test them, count clicks from case open to sign out, time image loads on your largest files, watch for hesitation or confusion from your pathologist while they're using the software. If it feels like they don't just naturally know what to do and they are looking almost for a manual to tell them what to do next, that's probably not a great sign. And have your pathologist talk to other pathologists who have used the platform. What's been their experience day to day? Has their feedback actually been heard over time? Has it resulted in real changes to the product? That tells you a lot about what the vendor relationship is going to feel like 3 years in. The guide actually includes a separate vendor scorecard checklist. Maybe you haven't even seen that, Dennis, because it's a follow on
Oh,
after. But
okay.
for people who download the guide, they also get this checklist a few days later that helps organize all the information. This also includes example questions to ask customer references. So you're not going in cold to those conversations and you can really ask some good pointed questions about the experience. So to wrap it up to your question, pathologists are often involved in the evaluation, but there's a lot more people could be doing in that process that we think helps make a more successful choice.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. You're listening to the People of Pathology podcast with our guest, Ashley Faber from Proscia. We'll be right back. When it comes to cancer staging, one of the most important parts is finding all of the lymph nodes. I should know. It's what I do every day. Yet this process has remained the same for over 100 years, manual, tedious, and time-consuming. That's a problem because every missed lymph node can mean inaccurate cancer staging. That's about to change. Enter InVision from Cision Vision, a first-of-its-kind device that's redefining the standard of care. Traditionally, we identify lymph nodes by sight and feel alone. InVision changes that using shortwave infrared technology to make lymph nodes stand out clearly from surrounding fat and in real time. In its first 104 patient study published in the Journal of Clinical Pathology, InVision helped increase lymph node counts in 86% of cases and even upstage 4% of patients from N0 to N1. I personally contributed to the study, and let me tell you, seeing the technology's impact firsthand was amazing. It's time to invest in grossing innovations that improve patient care. So, how is your lab approaching innovation in grossing? Book a demo at demo.cisionvision.com and start seeing lymph nodes like never before. Are you thinking about applying to a pathologist assistance program and feeling a little lost? That's why I created the Path to PathA, your PA school application blueprint. This is a step-by-step prep course that gives you everything you need for a strong application. From finding shadowing to writing a standout personal statement to prepping for interviews, this course was made to help you feel informed, confident, and ready. Visit www.thepath2patha.com to join the mailing list. You'll be the first to hear when the course launches. Your path starts here. Now for the rest of my conversation with Ashley Faber on the People of Pathology podcast. Something else you mentioned, because there are other departments involved. You mentioned IT, there's finance, operations, billing, I suppose. And all of these different departments have different priorities and maybe different language. And so it might be difficult to coordinate all those things together. What might be some other hurdles then in developing that kind of common vision across these departments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that is common to enterprise software buying in general. There's
Yeah.
always different stakeholders, and it's hard, not unique to digital pathology necessarily, but what we really wanted to focus on with this guide is every stakeholder group has very legitimate but different priorities. And this is like to put it very simply, but pathologists care about the viewer speed, the ergonomics, how many clicks it takes to get from case open to side out. What is their day to day going to look like? IT cares about security architecture, cloud posture, integration complexity. Finance wants a clear total cost of ownership, ROI model. Operations wants turnaround time data, workload management tools, and none of those goals conflict. They can feel like that when each group is evaluating in a silo with different criteria. And where that could go wrong is one department falls in love with the platform based on a really impressive demo. Another rejects it based on an integration gap, and nobody really surfaces the disconnect until very late in the process. So this guide tries to address this structurally by organizing it by stakeholder domain. So we recommend assigning section owners, like IT owns security and technical architecture, pathology owns clinical workflow and user experience, finance owns kind of like pricing analysis. Then you come together as a selection committee to score, compare, and discuss trade-offs openly, because every platform decision is going to involve some trade-offs, but the best evaluations make those trade-offs really explicit, and you can even document them in your group. So we know they're not the best at this, but we have decided to weight more heavily on this, and therefore that's why we're making this decision. It gives you a place to really flesh that out. And we really think it's important also, the best thing you can do is define your evaluation criteria with your committee before you see any demos or talk to any vendors. Agree on what matters, agree on the weights, meaning like how heavily are we going to weight certain integration capabilities versus user experience, that sort of thing. Then see how the vendors stack up after. And that's what separates confident decisions from a lot of, we can get into a lot of second guessing that goes on. But if you always return back to what were our core principles before we even talked to anybody, and what did we decide as a committee was most important to us. And that's why we do really love this guide, because you take that and use it to all get on the same page before you even talk to anybody. So nobody is brought in at the last minute. They don't know what the rest of the committee cares about, or I've already talked to 5 different companies and you didn't get the thought process of the operations team. And now you're coming in too late and you have to go back to all these companies and ask all these additional questions. So that's really high alignment at the beginning is really the best advice we can offer there.
Okay, that seems, I've worked in the hospital system for a long time, and that seems like all of this kind of pre-planning and having everything, like you said, alignment before even looking at a platform. That seems like it probably doesn't happen that often, or at least not yet, but probably should.
Yeah, we're always really excited when we do receive RFPs or companies come to us when they do have this already very well fleshed out and they have kind of like the right people on the call. We're like, yes, you are already like leaps and bounds ahead, and it'll just make the rest of the process go a lot more smoothly.
Okay, that makes sense. I want to talk about the pathology data aspect for a little bit, because this is highlighted in the guide as well, and it's addressed as a long-term asset, right? So you can use it for AI for research for, you mentioned pharma partnerships a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
So how should
Mhm.
organizations think differently about their data before they even select a platform?
Yeah, so most labs aren't thinking about this in a platform evaluation, but whole side images, especially when paired with clinical data, represent one of the richest data assets in healthcare. Right now, targeted therapies are growing more advanced and complex. Life sciences really need a deep understanding of human biology to precisely target the pathways driving disease. And this new pathology data modality is indispensable in that equation, and especially in the era of AI. Computational pathology allows researchers to dive deeper into the biology of the cell. It's really exciting to be in this space during this time where we can effectively tap into this unexplored biology that the growing adoption of digital has only recently unlocked. And because this data is created in routine clinical practice, it captures a full spectrum of disease variation across representative patient populations, something that can augment carefully controlled trial populations, which makes it even more interesting to drug and diagnostic developers. So, the question you should ask during evaluation is, does this platform store my organization's data in a way that makes it searchable, governed, and portable? Can I de-identify data for secondary use? Can I build a cohort from my archive based on diagnosis and stain type, for example? Can my lab serve as a strategic partner to life sciences, contributing to the development of better diagnostics and treatments? So we encourage organizations to think about this. And this is even if research or pharma partnerships aren't on their immediate roadmap, because the cost of selecting a platform that treats images more as data assets is essentially zero upfront. But the optionality it creates is really significant. And the cost of getting it wrong, like choosing a platform that treats images just as files that should be archived and deleted, means you're really foreclosing options you may want in 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so this is another one of those aspects where you're looking into the future to make sure the platform that you're going to
Right.
choose will serve you when you get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And you may never choose to go down that
Mhm.
route, and that's totally fine. It's more some another thing to think about that is a good just, okay, let's consider this before we make this monumental decision. And something that we were excited to surface in the buyer's guide, because I don't think it's not something that might naturally come up when people are thinking about what to ask vendors.
Mhm, mhm. A couple other things that kind of this sort of future proofing aspect, right? When you're talking about spatial biology and multiplex imaging, how do you evaluate a platform for that? I mean, these are things that are not exactly brand new, but pretty new. How do you do that?
The honest answer is that no platform is fully future proof. The field is moving too fast for
Mhm,
anyone to guarantee we're going to cover every emerging modality that comes out in the future of time. But there's a meaningful difference between a platform that's architecturally positioned to adapt and one that's not. So there are a few concrete things you can evaluate there. First, I would suggest standards adoption. So does the platform support DICOM natively? One way you can dig into this a little more, does the vendor participate in standards bodies like the DICOM Working Group 26 for pathology? There's actually a paper just published recently from that working group where you can see objective results on how the vendor scored. Vendors who invest in standards are investing in interoperability, and interoperability is what lets you adapt to new modalities down the line without ripping out your infrastructure. Second is really the kind of a similar but different item is the openness of the integration framework. So, can you deploy third-party AI applications, or are you limited to what the vendor builds or bundles? How easy is it to do that? Is there an open API that lets new tools plug in as they emerge? This is increasingly important, not only because, of course, with there's going to be more and more AI that comes out that your organization will likely want to take advantage of in the future. But It's also, especially if you have a data science part of your organization or a research part of your organization, the barrier to developing custom AI models is dropping really fast in this age of AI with AI coding assistants and
Yeah.
that whole trend. So, your institution's researchers may want to build and deploy their own algorithms, even if that's something that historically they've never done. And if you can't deploy them on the platform, that's gonna be a bummer, right?
Right.
So that's one thing to think about too, is just, okay, they can't guarantee me they're gonna have this emerging modality in 2 years, but are we just seeing like an architecture where we have a future? And third, I would just ask for examples. So show me a time when an emerging modality came out, you're able to support it quickly because of the architecture you have. Talk to their customers who can speak to that. There's just a general, like, nimbleness in both the team and the technology to move to the market and what, the customer is looking for that you just wanna see evidence of. And then you'll know, "Okay, when the time comes for my thing and what I want to use in the future, I have a very well-architected, open platform that will allow me to do that."
Okay. Okay. I like this. So you're right. Again, ahead of time, you're asking a lot of questions and you're trying to decide what you're going to need years down the road and having that all in mind before you even choose a platform, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it's not that could feel really overwhelming to people. Well, how am
Hmm.
I even gonna know what I'm gonna need in 2 years? And that's exactly the point to we've at least at Proscia with Concentric, we've invested so much in ensuring that the platform is able to be nimble to these emerging needs, whether they're new modalities or just things that our customers need, new workflows, things like that. So I think it's more about, okay, you're not going to be able to check the box on every single little feature or AI tool that you're going to want in the future, but just make sure the bones are there.
Okay. Okay. I like that. That's good. So say you've chosen a platform and you've got it ready to go and you're using it, but at some point something's going to go wrong. You're going to need support and maybe after hours support. So this might be something else that's overlooked in the planning stage too, right? This is one of the things you don't think about until you need it. And what are some ways that organizations can keep that in mind when they're evaluating this platform ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key question to answer internally before you talk to any vendor is, what does your clinical workflow look like outside of business hours? If you're using digital pathology for primary diagnosis and pathologists are working evenings, weekends, holidays, then system availability and support availability is a patient care requirement at that point, like full stop. If your use case is primarily research or archival, business hours support may be perfectly adequate, but make that really an explicit documented decision during evaluation. You don't want to discover your support gaps after go live. And really, the way we recommend you do this is go beyond the SLA document. Where's the support team located? Time zone coverage matters. What's the actual response time for after hours critical issues? Not the contractual target, but what reference customers are actually experiencing in practice. Show us the data. Can you talk to a customer who has actually needed after hours support, and could we talk to them and learn about what that experience was like?
Mm,
One thing that gets overlooked is LIS integration support. So if the connection between your LIS and the digital pathology platform breaks, that's a workflow stopping clinical issue.
yeah.
And pathologists can't receive cases. So does the vendor support team own that problem, or do they point you to the LIS vendor? You really want a team who takes responsibility for the full workflow and not just their application and isolation. Do they have LIS kind of experts on their support team? These are the kind of things that you can dig into to go a step further than just checking the box. Like, okay, you have good technical support.
Okay, I see. It goes deeper than that. Like it's not just, oh, these people are available 24/7 or whatever. It's
Yeah.
what can they actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You really want them to feel almost like an extension of your team. that they're on your team to help you. That's the vibe you want to get
Mhm.
from the vendor instead of just it's a transactional thing.
Okay. Okay. I like that. There's a lot more information in this guide. Did you want to talk about where listeners can get the guide?
Yeah, absolutely. So if any of this resonated, the guide is free to download. You can go to proscia.com where you can find it. I believe also, Dennis, you may be posting it in the show notes,
Yes.
which is very helpful. I appreciate the link in the show
Yeah,
notes.
I'll
Thank
include
you.
it there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
That's where to go.
All right. Awesome. Great. Actually, this has been a very interesting conversation. Like I said, I read the guide. I really enjoyed it. There's definitely a lot to think about in there.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Ashley Faber, thank you so much. If you're looking for another episode of the People of Pathology podcast to check out after this one, here's a clip from my interview with Arun Ananth as we talk about how digital pathology is becoming a profit center, not a cost center.
To your point, ROI is return on investment is still a major consideration for going digital, right? When we start the conversation by saying digital pathology is a profit center and not a cost center, now let's talk about it. How that is happening is initially a curiosity with which the discussion starts, but then realizing that labs, irrespective of the sizes, can have realized these benefits has completely turned around the conversation. I strongly believe over a period of time, reimbursement will become, we're already seeing early shoots up there. But until then, we do need to find financially sustainable ways to adopt technology. That has been the biggest pain of the slow nature of the adoption curve that you're seeing in pathology. So to be able to have the value that today, and we are not talking 3 years down the line, today, you digitize, you start, and you actually realize the value by partnering with pharma or AI development company has completely changed, at least for administrators, CFOs, COOs, how they are taking decisions on digitization.
You can hear more from Arun Ananth in episode 213. All right, big thanks to Ashley Faber from Proscia for joining me today. I like this conversation a lot because it's so practical. Digital pathology discussions often focus heavily on the technology itself, the scanners, the AI, the software features, but Ashley really emphasized something that can easily get overlooked. Making good decisions starts with asking good questions. And that sounds simple, but it's incredibly important. Many pathology departments and laboratories are navigating digital transformation without a roadmap. For some organizations, this may be the first time they've ever gone through a large-scale software evaluation process like this. There can be pressure to compare feature lists or focus only on immediate needs. But as Ashley explained, the decisions being made today will influence workflows, data accessibility, scalability, and innovation opportunities for years to come. I also thought the discussion around stakeholder agreement was especially valuable. Pathologists, laboratory leadership, IT teams, administrators, everyone interacts with these systems in a different way. Bringing end users, the pathologists, into the process early helps organizations avoid choosing platforms that may meet technical requirements on paper, but are difficult to use in day-to-day practice. Pathologists are the people using these systems every day, and their perspective matters tremendously when evaluating usability, workflow integration, and overall efficiency. Another big takeaway from this episode is the growing importance of pathology data itself. Whole slide images are more than just digital versions of glass slides. They're becoming long-term assets that can support education, collaboration, AI development, quality improvement, and research partnerships. That means organizations have to think carefully about how data is stored, managed, and integrated across their system. Ashley also highlighted the importance of flexibility in platform architecture. The field is evolving rapidly with advances in AI, spatial biology, multiplex imaging, and computational pathology. We've talked about most of these areas on this podcast before. Nobody can perfectly predict the future, but organizations can position themselves more effectively by selecting platforms designed to adapt as new technologies emerge. I think that's one of the biggest themes throughout this entire digital pathology movement: adaptability. The organizations that succeed won't necessarily be the ones with the flashiest technology today. They'll be the ones building infrastructure that allows them to evolve over time ready to serve the patients of the future. If you'd like to learn more, Proscia's Digital Pathology Buyer's Guide is available as a free download on their website. You can also find a link to it in the show notes for this episode. Don't forget, you can follow this show at People of Path on Instagram or just connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for continuing to share the show with others. Together, let's inspire the next generation of pathologists and laboratory professionals. This show is a member of Health Podcast Network. Thanks for listening. I'm Dennis Strank, and I'll talk to you next time on the People of Pathology podcast.